I think that her origin story kind of comes from a lot of different other traditions, and there are different forms of her in many different Latin American countries. But I think that Santa Marta specifically, this idea kind of comes from like Mictacasihuat was the goddess of the underworld, who was the lady of the Lord, which is Mictlantecutli. And I feel like that Aztec tradition, essentially, like as time continued, it was taken down by the Catholic Church. But just like every other practice, such as Santeria and Candomblé or any other practice, it kind of hid its way within the church or within. Okay. So my name is Alexis Arredondo. I grew up in South Texas, kind of near the borders of Mexico, in a small town. And ever since I was young, I've been interested and involved with curanderismo and Mexican folklore and folk magic. And then in 1996, I was like in junior high school. I was doing a report on Dia de los Muertos, and I came across a book called Skeletons at the Feast. And there was a picture of a saint known as Santa Muerte or Santísima Muerte. And I didn't know who she was. I didn't have any way to research her because we didn't have internet at the time. And so I just kind of thought, well, that's interesting. And it wasn't until 2001 when I moved to Corpus Christi that I went to a shop and they had statues filled with her. And I started to learn about her from various teachers in Corpus Christi and some teachers in the surrounding areas, as well as here in Austin, Texas, where I currently live.
Okay, and as far as like what got you into it, did you feel like there was any kind of like a calling or any special feeling that you had to in order to like oh that's what I want, or was it just you just saw it and you're like that's something I'm interested in getting into?
I think just from the idea that I'd never heard of her, and I knew a lot about folk saints and folk magic at the time, but I didn't know who this saint was, and I had never heard about her in any way. And then, kind of going to Corpus Christi, I saw the image again of statues at these shops, and I would ask a little bit more about who she was and what she represented, and I did kind of like, I didn't right away just buy a statue, and I was like, I'm going to start working with her. I wanted to know more about who she was and kind of develop that relationship with her. And so the way that I was taught to do that was she told me, the lady that worked at the shop at the time, she said, just give her water and a candle. And so I started developing that relationship with her and did that for years until I finally actually started doing works with her. So I would say like the calling was just kind of being genuinely attracted to her, and also just in general, like working with magic and working with the dead, like that's something I do as well. So it just kind of coalesced from that.
Do you consider her necromancer?
In a sense, I think. I mean, necromancy is the work, working with the dead. So I would say she's as much of necromancy as Palo Mayombe would be, or any of those other traditions.
So, whenever you say working with the dead, do you feel like she also connects with like other spirits? Like she will help you with like ancestor work or anything like that?
I think that she can be a part of that in the sense that like you could also pray with her before like you pray with the ancestors if you wanted to, and just kind of have her help you like open that door if you've never done ancestral work before. But I don't think it's necessary. I don't think that you can't work with the ancestors if you're only, if you just work with her or vice versa. So yeah, I think she can help you out. And like if you look behind me to my left over here, I have my ancestor altar above, and then my altar is right below. So they kind of do work hand in hand, or they work really close to each other.
Okay. And as far as her being a folk saint, do you think she's more of a Catholic folk saint or like strictly a Mexican folk saint?
I feel like she's kind of a little bit of both. So she kind of derives from the Mexica tradition as well as some other folk saints of the area. So in the Mexica tradition, she's known as Mictacasihuat, which is the goddess of death. And then in the other traditions that are kind of in the surrounding areas, you have El Rey San Pascual, and then you have Mashimon, which are the folk saints of Guatemala. And so if you look in that area, you start to see kind of where that cult of the death also kind of grew out of. So I feel like she's definitely a folk saint, not so much a Catholic saint, because the Catholic Church doesn't recognize her as one, but she's definitely a folk saint. And because of that, and because she's kind of chosen Mexico as her home, she's definitely a Mexican saint as well.
Okay. So getting into that kind of viewpoint as far as her being, definitely more of a Mexican or Latin American thing, do you feel like people have to be of that heritage in order to call out to her, or is it rather open?
It's open to everyone because she does not have any distinction between us by skin or any other way. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, Hispanic, if you're gay, straight, transgender, it doesn't matter, because in the end, we all encounter death, and that's who she is. She is death. So it doesn't matter who you are, you can always work with her. I think the main thing to remember is to acknowledge her culture and where she comes from, acknowledge her tradition and where she comes from. And as long as you truly do that and you truly understand where this, cult was derived from, then you can be any race and work with her. But like a good example is, she was essentially born from poverty. She comes from poverty. So if you've never, been poor, then you need to understand what it's like to be poor in Mexico and see why this tradition, was created, and look into that. So that's why I always say, like, if you're just looking at YouTube videos and reading a book that you bought at a store, that's not going to teach you a lot about her cult and where she came from. You really have to kind of do your research and look to see how it was created.
Right. And one of the other things is, do you feel that as far as her history being an old death goddess, do you feel like she was able to survive through Catholicism? And or was it just kind of something that just came about and she was just, attracted to it, what have you?
So I think that her origin story kind of comes from a lot of different other traditions, and there are different forms of her in many different Latin American countries. But I think that Santa Muerte specifically, this idea kind of comes from like Mictacasihuat was the goddess of the underworld, who was the lady of the Lord, which is Mictlantecutli. And I feel like that Aztec tradition, essentially, like, as time continued, it was taken down by the Catholic Church. But just like every other practice, such as Santeria and Candomblé or any other practice, it kind of hid its way within the church or within traditional religion. So essentially what you have is an evolution of Mictacasihuat to Santa Muerte, so the saint version of her. But they're not the same thing. You can't call Santa Muerte and Mictacasihuat because they're two different complete forms. Just like I always use the example of Legba in the Vodun tradition of Africa is not the same as Papa Legba in Haitian Voodoo, because Papa Legba is what was created from this merge of African Vodun and Catholicism brought together. And so that's kind of what you have in this tradition, is a folk saint that was created from this iconic death image, as well as a few other kind of variants that exist in previous Latin American cultures.
Okay. And as far as coming up and approaching her, I know I'd asked you this before, do you feel like you have to have that Catholic, that Christian background with her? Like, she's like 100% Christo-pagan as far as the realm of what paganism is. So whenever you come up to her, I guess you have to come up to her in that approach. You're not really going to approach her in more of a witchcraft way, like, say, I would approach like my Norse gods and things like that. Mm-hmm. So
it's important to acknowledge her tradition and where she comes from. There's a famous quote that says, it doesn't matter where Santísima Muerte originated from. What matters is where she made her home, and she's made Mexico her home. and Mexico is Catholic. So you have to acknowledge the Catholic tradition that she comes from. I'm not saying you have to be Catholic. You don't have to, go to a Catholic church or anything like that, unless you needed like certain objects such as holy water or relics or whatever. But what's important is to acknowledge that the tradition she comes from is Catholic. So you have to say, a few Catholic prayers, and you have to do these things in order to get to where you need to get with her, essentially. Another thing too to think about is, if you want to approach her from a more Aztec tradition, which you can, that's kind of one of the ways that I was taught, is that you can use the Aztec kind of language and the tradition within practice. So you can do that too, but again, a lot of the current Aztec tradition as is practiced now has a lot of Catholic influence within it.
Right.
One of the prayers we say a lot is in Nahuatl is Isnancinco Toteltatsin, Isasotinco Toteltitni, Isacinco Toyewasini Pamenowani. And that literally means in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Holy Spirit. But we still use it every single time that we do Mexica Aztec dance, so that's kind of the thing that you have to see is like, yes, it may be a Catholic influence, but you also have to understand that Catholicism essentially came from paganism. So if you're doing that, you're not going against your pagan roots or heritage. And another thing to remember too is like, a lot of those traditions essentially they were Catholic. They were pagan originally. So, do that, honor that, know that that's where it comes from, is that it comes from paganism.
Okay. And whenever people are starting out with her, what is something that you feel is absolutely necessary that they should know firsthand before really diving into her worship?
So I always tell people to remember that when you're going to work with her, you work with her for life. There is a way to kind of break yourself away from her, but it does take a lot of work, and it takes a lot of, properly getting rid of the image that you may have of her, properly getting rid of her tools, and it's not an easy thing to do. Mm-hmm. But it can be done. But I always tell people, like, remember that anytime you're going to work with her, you're working with her for life. You're starting a relationship with her for life. And that's probably the biggest thing. And then I'd say, like, the next thing is, like, try to really learn from people who have actually, been taught how to work with her, because if you're learning from books or if you're learning from YouTube videos, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And that's one of the reasons I created the Facebook group that I have now, because there was so much misinformation just kind of being thrown out there, and I was seeing a lot of mixing, and that's another big no-no. It's like, no mixing, don't mix Palomayombe with her, don't mix Ifa with her, don't mix Santeria with her, like, right. All things have been happening. So that's another thing that you don't do, and then I'd say another thing too is, like, don't put her, don't add her to your collection. If you have a room full of, a bunch of saints that you use for hoodoo, or some goddesses and gods that you use for witchcraft, you don't want to just put her there with everybody else, because she's not happy with that. She wants to be your saint. She wants to be the person you go to on a daily basis and say, hey, this is my situation, this is what I'm going through in life, etc., etc.
So obviously I do that, but I try to separate it as much as possible and give their own space. I was told, and of course, I don't know how true it is, that when I first started working with her, that so long as she was elevated and she was above everybody else, that she was given that status of, you're more important than anything else I have on here. So I guess that's kind of my other question is, obviously, you're trying to work out all of these falsehoods and try to lead people down the right road. So, am I doing it right? Should I go ahead and give her own, like, cabinet, or...
She'll definitely let you know if you're doing it wrong. That's one thing to remember. But, she does appreciate certain spaces and areas in the house. Like I tell people all the time, if you have her in a room filled with a whole bunch of other altars, she's probably not going to love that as much as she would like to be, like, in the living room or in the kitchen or somewhere that you're constantly around, because she wants to be around where you're around. Now, I know that's hard for some people to do, because maybe you live in an area where it's not as socially accepted, or your family doesn't accept it. And that's why I also recommend, like, things like a cabinet or some kind of armoire, like the one I have behind me here, actually closes. So when there's people that come over that I know won't understand her, I can just close it and I don't have to worry about it. But she's still here in the living room and she's still watching the front door. And that's another thing she really appreciates, is like a front door, looking at the front door, seeing who's coming in, so she can keep an eye on them. Also, like if you have like an area of your house that's just kind of like a lobby or a vestibule, like right where you walk in, like she loves being right there, just, or a little hallway. Because that's kind of, again, like she wants to be like the person that greets you when you come home, the first thing that you see, in a sense, but it really varies. I mean, I've seen altars in Mexico that are in people's bedrooms, which they always say is a big no-no, but what, they are very considerate of her, and they make sure to cover her if they need to, like if they're going to be doing anything private. So it doesn't matter. And I've also seen, or heard like, don't put her on the floor, but some people, that's all they can do is put her on the floor. Yeah. So the main thing to remember is, like, she'll tell you if it's wrong. You'll know, because you just won't feel right, or maybe you're doing all these works or prayers and there's nothing's happening. She'll let you know. She'll definitely let you know.
Okay. And as far as doing work and stuff with her, I know that you said you waited years. I myself have waited 2 years to even start working with her. But on some of the apps that I go into, of course, I find people who are like, oh, well, just print off a picture and you can start working with her right now. But then they complain that this isn't working, this isn't happening. Of course, people who have asked me, well, why aren't you doing stuff for other people? Because I use her solely for like me and my family, and that's it. But I'm always like, I don't feel right about doing it. So I was just, I guess the question is, like, what is your approach and what should be done as far as developing this relationship, and when is a good time to start, doing things with her for others, or, what have you?
Yeah. So, yes, I did essentially just honor her for years. And I always tell people too, like, if you're not sure if you want to have this practice for life, start with just the basic candle and water for a good few months. And if after a few months you're like, yeah, I could do this, I could see myself developing this relationship further and for the rest of my life, then continue. But if you're not, that's where you stop. That's your cutoff time. That's your intermittent time of just being able to be like, okay, no, this is not going to work for me, and everything will be good, because she's not going to be the kind of person that's going to be vindictive in that sense. But if you develop that relationship with her, I say a good few months, the same length that it would take for you to develop a relationship with a friend, a really good friend. If I come to your house, and I know I've met you before, but if I'm like, hey, Shannon, I need you to go do this for me, and do this for me, and do this for me, and can you do that, and you do that, and you'll be like, whoa, like, we've met once, and you're having me do all this stuff for you, and I hardly really know you. But that's not going to work out. But if I meet you and I offer you some water every time you come over to my house, and I offer you some food and some prayer, and I thank you for everything that you've done for me, and we develop that friendship, that relationship, then over time, then yeah, you'll do me some really big favors, and I'll do you some really big favors. So that's the kind of relationship you need to have with her. That's the kind of relationship that Mexicans especially develop with their saints. It's not just well, I'm going to buy a picture of a saint and then she's going to do work for me. We develop relationships. We light candles for them. We offer and give devotion to them, and then, and only then, can we start doing work with them. As for doing works for others, when you start to feel comfortable enough to know that, like, these works are working for me, I'm not really having those issues of like, is this working, is this not working? That's kind of when you can start doing works for other people. But there's always a time and a place for things. If your friend is saying, I'm having all these troubles and I don't know what to do, you'll know Santa Muerte will come to you and she'll be like, hey, I can take care of that, and she'll tell you, like, now is the time for you to do that work with me, or if you work with other traditions, those other traditions probably do the same thing. You're like, oh, well, I know that this person really needs a good road opening. Well, I'm going to go to Elegua of Santeria because I work with Elegua, and Elegua opens roads, Yeah. But if it's something that's specific to the dead, or specific to love matters, or things that that could work really well with Santa Muerte, then you go to Santa Muerte, and you ask her.
And what all can you do with Santa Muerte? Because, I mean, I know that we call her necromancy and things like that, but obviously she does more than just work with the dead. So what all can she encompass?
So in the system, the way I was taught is that we have 3 robes: the white, the red, and the black. The white robe essentially can do anything with protection, healing, anything having to do with like elevation, light. Any one of those could work with her. For the red, and we have names for each one too. For the white, we call her La Madrina, the godmother, right? And then for the red, we call her La Flaquita, and that's more of a term of endearment, which means the skinny girl, the skinny lady.
Yeah.
And she is the one that focuses a lot more on like emotional issues, love matters, things that a lot have to deal a lot with, like either the heart or the brain, just like all that area of just kind of like emotion and the things that we feel. She can also deal with some darker stuff if you needed to, but usually related to those things. And then we go to the black, which we refer to in the tradition as La Reina de las Brujas, which literally means the Queen of the Witches. And she's more of like the dark stuff, the dark magic, the necromantic arts, if you will, the extreme protection, like someone's sending you stuff, protection, or doing stuff to you, protection. And if you work with the 3 robe system, that's all you need, really. You could do any work that you need to do with all 3. For instance, let's say you wanted to do a spell to break up a situation, like maybe there's 2 people that just aren't right or not meant to be together, or there's something there, maybe like one's hitting the other. You could essentially call upon like the red Santa Muerte and the black Santa Muerte and do a work with both of them to break that barrier, break that love, and let that person move on. Or if you needed like extreme protection and peace, for somebody, you could do the black and the white, or do a combination of all 3 for really, really, really big workings. Like dark cleansings, etc. So you could use those 3, and at the same time, there are other robes. There are people that use the green robe for money, and the red robe. I'm sorry, not the red robe. The purple robe for divination or psychic abilities. Blue for healing. Things like that. And then of course the rainbow one, which everybody likes. It's got all the colors. Yeah.
So it's because I mean, like, I obviously have a gold one, so that's a little bit outside of what tradition would call for. But so basically, it's okay to have those ones if that's what you're working with. But the main 3 that you should really work with are the red, white, and black.
Yes, and the other thing too, like I still have it in some storage, but I have a larger one that's about maybe like 3 feet tall, and it's black. But you can easily just dress it up and change the color of the robe depending on your need. Like one time I was working with the money, so I just covered it in a gold, robe, and I created a robe for her that was gold. And then I was working with the gold aspect and asking for money. If I needed a more like white, peaceful atmosphere, I'd color her in white and give her white lace and white flowers. And so you can do that too, and that's used a lot in Mexico, especially where they can't afford to buy, all 3
statues.
So you just buy one nice statue and then you change out the dresses,
Okay, so even like with this one, if I wanted to work with a different aspect, I could just cover her in a different thing and adorn her with different flowers that equated to wonderful.
I mean, they're all the same. Essentially, it's all the same one. They're just different aspects of her. So
right.
if you could visualize her wearing red and you pray to the red, then you're praying to the red. So it's not necessarily like, it doesn't have to just be, oh, well, this is the money, something like that, and it's only going to be money. Remember that essentially, you could bring that energy in any different way. The idea of prosperity doesn't have to be physical prosperity. It can be prosperity in love, and prosperity in luck, and prosperity in peace, prosperity in life.
Okay, and talking about the actual setup, like, does it have to be grandiose, or is it okay to just keep it as, as simple and as easy as you can afford? Like, because I know that you did in your Facebook group that you have, you posted up, you can't take it with you. So I guess, like, does it really matter at the end of the day, so long as you're giving her the basic stuff like the tequila and the cigarettes and things?
Yes, it does not matter. You do what you can do. You know, if you're spending hundreds of dollars on her and you barely make $200-300 a week, then you're doing it wrong. You know, you need to give her what you can. Never overdo it in that sense. Like, it's okay to have big giant statues if you have the space and you want to devote that to her. Fine, that's great, but it's not going to be any better than the woman in Mexico who has an altar the size of this laptop right by her bed with her candle and her tequila and her small icon. You know, there's more devotion in that altar than there is in these giant, big altars. You know, so that really doesn't matter. In America, we like this idea of bigger is better, and that's totally fine. That's just the way we are. I used to, like I said, I myself used to have a giant 3-foot statue that I worked with, but over time, I eventually collected the 3 robes, and I was like, well, you know what? I'm just going to work with this one. And even now, my altar has gone down considerably in size. So that doesn't necessarily mean that my faith has gone down in size. It just means that I'm simplifying it, and I'm working with her on a much simpler level, and it still works.
So, what are some offerings that you should at least work towards giving her, and what are some things that you should avoid giving her?
Oh, that's good. That's a good question. So definitely water is a big thing for her, and it should always be in a glass, not plastic. It should always be in an actual glass cup, preferably a clear glass like this one, or a wine glass preferably. Definitely always make sure that she has water. I try to change that out sometimes 2 times a week. So every Tuesday is the day that we usually work with her, and then Saturday we kind of like empty it out and refill it. Nice glass of cool water. Bread is a good one that you could always have on the altar. It's not necessary, but remember that everything that you place on the altar has to have a reason. So we place water on the altar because water is pure and it's clean, and it traps bad energy. It traps negativity. So that's why when you're done with that water, you throw that water outside the house. You don't throw that water down your sink or anywhere inside the house. You throw it out. With bread, you don't place that bread and go like, well, here's your bread, please enjoy your bread, because Santa Marta doesn't eat bread. But you can place that bread, and you can say, continue to bring me my daily bread, so that I continue to have these things in my life, and I offer it to you. So it's like a constant thing. Like she brings that bread into our lives, and we offer that to her. It's showing that we're grateful for the stuff that we're getting into our lives. Apples, continue to bring me the fruits of my labor. These are things that I say as I place things on the altar. With tequila, like thanking her for the tequila and remembering that tequila comes from the earth, and the earth comes from the plant, and from the plant, this takes work. It's not something, we're so easy to just go to the store and buy a bottle of tequila. Like, that's easy for us. But
and ruin it.
Yeah, in the old days, like that took a lot of time. That took a lot of work to make tequila. It still does, depending on where you get it. So you have to think about it in that sense. You're not just like, here's your offerings and enjoy them. Yes, that's part of it. But a big part of it too is that, what does that represent? What does that offering represent on the altar? As for things to stay away from, this is actually one that a lot of people don't know about. When you offer her roses, you should try to take the thorns off, because thorns are actually used a lot in cursing. So just take them off, remove them, and then I keep them for if I ever need to use them for cursing.
I did that without knowing, because I'm like, I'm going to need these for something later on, so I always just took them off anyways. I didn't realize that was actually something I needed to do.
Not necessary, but I think that you'll notice a difference if you do, because again, like, we can easily go buy flowers and put them on our altar, but if we take the time to go through each one of those roses and pull those thorns off, and that's the other thing too, you should try to pull them as opposed to cut them, because the act of cutting is like a violent act. So if you just like kind of take thorn between 2 fingers and kind of pop it to the side, it comes off really easily. So like those kinds of things you should definitely avoid. You should avoid things that you cannot offer her again. Like if you're like, I'm going to buy you a $600 bottle of tequila, the next time you offer her tequila and it's $20, he's like, hey, where's my $600 bottle that you got me last time? Especially if it's just like a basic offering. If it's what we call a manda, which is like a big thank you, then that is fine. Like, definitely buy her the expensive bottle of tequila if you can afford it. But if you're offering her like a really expensive tequila one week and then $20 tequila the next, it's probably not going to go well. Or it's going to take some time, for her to be like, I'm not used to this,
Yeah.
but yeah, I can't think of anything like really, really bad that you should not place. I think maybe like the biggest thing is like no dead animals. Like don't sacrifice a chicken to her. Don't kill anything for her. Because you know what, that's her job. Her job is to take the animal's life, not yours. You know, so that's a big thing. You know, and that's one of the reasons I even started working on a book specifically was because I came across an article that people had killed people in Mexico in her name and started doing human sacrifice because they equated her with Mictacasiwa, who once took human sacrifice. So these are the types of things that I was like, no, okay, this has to stop. And I started working with creating.
Yeah, we don't even do human sacrifices in Palo, and that's like that can get pretty scary. I know that of course we do sacrifices with goats and things like that to them, and I know that the goat horns I actually did after all that stuff, after it was buried and cleansed, I went ahead and put it on her altar just because I was like, she actually might like this, just because it's one of those things. Of course, when we do it, we'll make we'll use the discada and we'll make a dish out of it so that the meat doesn't go, it doesn't go to waste.
Yeah,
so exactly. At that time, it's kind of like, well, now it was used for something else and some joy came out of it. And it was, traditionally Mexican. So maybe she might actually appreciate it. Whenever it comes to things like that, how do you feel about, giving her that kind of offering or giving her that kind of decor if it feels like she might understand the tradition behind it?
If it feels right, it feels right. If it doesn't feel right, again, you'll know. She'll tell you this is wrong. This is not going to work for me. You'll place something on the altar and things will happen. Either something will fall or you just don't feel right. You feel a little ill. You feel really sick, or maybe you start having nightmares or bad dreams where she appears. That's how you'll know is that's when it's wrong. But yeah, in that case, like the way that you explain that situation, like that's totally fine because what you're doing is you're taking something that was sacrificed ritually for a different tradition, and then you essentially turned it into a meal, and then you're offering her like a part of that, and that's totally okay. But if you're like, I sacrificed this goat for her, and I put the skull on her altar, now we've got a problem. That's different. That's something so totally different, and that's not what this tradition is. And if anybody ever tells you that, if they say they sacrificed animals for her, if they say that they are a priest or a priestess of something like that, or any of that,
there's no such thing.
There's no such thing. There never has, and there never will be.
And I mean, as far as like the cult, I mean, there really isn't any centralized anything. Like there is no clergyman. There's no people that are higher than you. You pretty much just talk amongst yourself because it's very much oral even today.
Yes, correct. There are no priests or priestesses. There are no hidden tomes or texts that are ancient texts that talk about her or anything like that. It is an oral tradition. It's, if anything, a modern day oral tradition. And so I don't want to say that means there are no wrongs because that's not true. There are wrongs. It's just a matter of kind of like using your head and for those that are kind of familiar with like spiritism or spiritismo in those traditions, like that's a big part of it, because the spiritismo is essentially like talking and working with the spirit and then kind of opening yourself up to feel that spirit and that energy and kind of communicate with it or work with it. And that's what you're doing in this case, except you're working with something like that. She'll tell you if things are wrong. She'll tell you if things aren't working right, and she'll tell you what you need to do. You'll be at her altar, maybe we're doing the rosary, and you see a candle, and then from the candle you start seeing a spell, and then boom, now you've got a trabajo that you can do with her. That's how it works. So that's a big part of it. That's definitely a big part of it. And then another thing too is, if you're really not sure, like, should I place this in the altar? Should I work with this robe? Should I do this? Then divination. Easily, take a set of tarot cards that you really feel work or resonates with her and say, these are for you, and I'd like to work with you and communicate with you on this. I have a set of tarot cards specifically for her that are Santa Muerte tarot cards that are from Mexico. And there's a few decks out there that I don't recommend. They're kind of, for lack of a better term, cultural appropriated. in that they're like, it's like Italian art and it has nothing to do with the tradition. But there's one deck in particular that's in Spanish that I highly recommend. And I think I have the link of it on our group as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, as far as, I guess the next question would be, what prayers do you suggest? Are there any books that you do suggest or things that you suggest to avoid reading? How, as far as research, what is the best resource to go through?
Yeah. So as for books in English, I have yet to come across a book that I'm like, this is like the best book to read on the subject. There's only one book I've ever come across that I really enjoy, and it's by Angus Fraser. And it's a book of photography. And the reason why I like it is because it shows you what devotion in Mexico really looks like. It's not, not just a documentary, but actual photographs of practitioners that have been working with there for years and for a very long time. And you can see like what devotion truly looks like. And then throughout the book itself, it has the novena prayer that you can do for the 9 days. And at the very end of the book, it even has like some basic things like the colors of the robes, the how to set up various specific altars for her. Like, for instance, the Santa Muerte that you have, the gold one, there's a specific altar in there with that one that you would create for like bringing money into your business. And you set up the altar that specific way.
That's actually the main reason why I even have her in here is because, of course, this is where I do all my business, and I want her to bless my business that I do. So
yeah, I highly recommend that book. I've seen all the other books in English. I've seen all the books by these experts that claim to go and learn all these things. And unfortunately, it's a lot of misinformation. A lot of it is blended with Wicca and other traditions that is complete and high magic, and that's completely incorrect.
This is very low magic. This is very low tier.
Yeah, exactly. It's folk magic. It's folk magic. It's folk tradition. It's a cult. It's not at all of those things. So I don't recommend any other books in English, unfortunately. And I've like I said, I've seen them all. And
you are writing one, right? So
and I'm not saying that because I'm like my book's the only true book. Like that's not it at all. I believe me, I give these books a chance. I see them, and I really hope I'm like finally someone else is going to correct this misinformation and make it worse. So no, I don't unfortunately have any other book resources. As for prayers, there are some available online, and you could always try to see if you could find the ones in Spanish and just translate them through Google Translate or anything like that. But I would say it's not the best. Yeah, I would say. But I do have a few available on the group, and I'm going to be adding more as I go. And I think the biggest or the best prayer you can do is the prayer that comes from your heart, because that is true prayer. That's where prayer comes from.
And is it an issue if you don't speak Spanish? Like, is it preferred that you do at least learn it at some point, or at least learn it well enough to recite a prayer in Spanish, or is it okay to do it in English?
It's okay to do it in English because that's totally fine. I mean, just the main thing I would always tell people is like just remember to call her by her Spanish name. Don't call her the Most Holy Death.
That's Santísima.
Yeah, you need to say like Santa Muerte, Santísima Muerte. Any one of those is fine, or La Flaquita, Madrina, Reina de las Brujas. But don't call her the Most Holy Death, the Most Sacred Death. Like that's not her name. Her name is Santa Muerte.
Yeah.
It would be like if my last name is Arredondo, which means of the round. You wouldn't say, "Hey, Alexis of the round." You would say, "Hey, Alexis Arredondo."
Yeah, nobody's gonna walk me and say Shannon Fenner. So.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to call her the name. But no, learning Spanish is not necessary. However, I will tell you that a lot of the good resources are in Spanish. So learning Spanish may be a good resource just so that you could learn more about the tradition.
Right. And so as far as those books go, I know that I did mention to you about one in particular that really struck a chord with me. Of course, I'm really big on appropriation. I come from a long line of witches and practitioners myself. So this is actually kind of a big deal to me whenever I see this happening, and it really upsets me whenever I see it. Even though I am very much white, I don't like it when people take away that culture from the religion. The one book I did see, it was very much whitewashing it. It was almost taking away all the Mexican culture out of it, saying, no, this is only Catholic. It comes from Italy. It comes from Europe. And I'm like, it really doesn't, though. So,
Yeah.
I mean, is that a problem that we're starting to see as far as these folk traditions from all the Latin America and stuff?
Yes, it is a problem because it's striking a blow at the tradition. It's really kind of you're taking a big part of the tradition out of it. You know, if you're saying that, oh, you know, it's not Mexican, it comes from Italy. Well, you know, I think I'm going back to that quote. It doesn't matter where it came from. What matters is where it made its home, and its home is Mexico. So you have to acknowledge that, you know. And I've seen some books too that are very upsetting where they combine hoodoo with brujeria and curanderismo and santeria, you know, and Santa traditions, and that's not the same thing. You know, they're similar. There are some similarities between hoodoo and brujeria, but they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it's important to acknowledge those differences and have that respect. It's kind of like, you know, I tell people all the time, if you want to be a witch and you want to work with El Legua from Lukumi Santeria, and you want to work with Papa Legba from Haitian Voodoo, then you should learn about those traditions and maybe even get a basic initiation in those traditions. Go get a La Fête in Voodoo. Go receive your Collares and El Legua from a Lukumi priest. And then you can work with them. But it shouldn't be like, oh, well, I'm a witch, so I can work with anything.
And that's not it. And I mean, yeah, even I've seen that in other groups. Like, I mean, I'm in hoodoo groups, and I see people constantly like, oh, I'm gonna pray to Papa Legba, and I'm like, are you initiated though? Like, are you? Exactly. I mean, and even then, you know, we see it where people are like, oh, well, with the Santo and the Palo, we have people who are like, you know, oh, well, you can't do both, and I'm like, no, you can. They're two separate things.
Or they'll be like, well, I found a book that teaches me how to make a ganga, so I'll just make a ganga myself.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, you have no idea like what you're doing. You know, that's not the way it works. You have to honor the tradition. And like in that case, you wouldn't make a ganga on your own. You would go to a palero and get scratched and work from there. Right. So you have to honor that tradition. That's where it comes from. You know, that's important. That's really important. So and that's a hard thing for us. There's a lot of ego in these traditions. There's a lot of ego in these practices because we think, you know, we're witches or we're, you know, brujos or whatever, and we can do whatever we want. But you have to focus on that ego and remind yourself, like, no, we can't. We have to honor and respect these traditions first. Because you know what? If you want to do that, you can, and your works may work for a while, but after a while, things are going to backfire. And
exactly.
Things are going to get sour really quick.
Yeah, like these aren't just simple energies like you can just mess around with, do whatever you want with. They will start to, you know, fuck your shit up after a little bit. So.
You know, and I tell people all the time, because one of the other reasons I started the group is that I had so many people, not even white people specifically, but mostly, you know, Mexicanos and Mexican Americans that were coming to me and saying, I tried working with her and then this happened and I feel like she's cursed me and blah, blah, blah. And I say, look, she's not out there to curse you. She's not out there to do these terrible things to you. What she can do is stop protecting you. And once she stops protecting you, that's when everything comes back. All those times that you've been working with these things and all these things that you've been working on, that's all going to come back to you because that protection is not there anymore. And she's not there to help you. So she's not going to curse you. She's not going to ruin your life. She's not going to destroy you or kill you. What she's going to do is just forget about you. And when she does that, that's when everything kind of goes bad.
Yeah. So as far as, you know, things to avoid and whatnot, I guess I feel like we kind of covered the subject pretty well. Is there anything else you would like to add as like something I didn't think of or what have you?
Yeah, just in general, or?
Yeah, just in general, or specifically about her worship, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things in the system that I've been, you know, I'll be putting in the book, obviously, but also just trying to teach people, like, there are ways to set up their altar. There are ways to use the altar correctly. So there are things that you should do, or you can learn to do, because, you know, things like I said before, have to be placed on the altar with intention. And the practice itself has a lot of spiritual intention. That's why I say, like, espiritismo is a big part of it. If you place something on the altar and something in the back of your mind is saying that doesn't feel right, then that probably is not right. It's probably incorrect. So you have to have that intuition or a little bit of mediumship to make sure that you're practicing correctly. But I would say, I guess the biggest thing, and I always stress, is, don't just start working with her. Don't just buy an image of her and immediately start doing spells with her. Develop a relationship with her. Start simple, start basic, start with a glass of water, start with a candle, and just work on developing that relationship with her. You can do prayers, you can do the rosary, just don't start asking her for things yet. Build that relationship, make a strong foundation, and once that foundation is created, then you'll see that all that time that you spent creating that is going to really pay off in the long run.
Okay. Well, I guess that's everything. I'm going to go ahead and include, of course, the links to your Facebook group and all that stuff, so that if anybody else has any questions that we didn't cover, they can go directly to you and join the group and figure out what, the best way to move along. So, sounds good. All right, then. Thank you for doing this. I'm so excited. I appreciate it. I really do.
I'm like, Eric, I was like, I want to do more of these. Like, we should do Kimbanda, and we should do...
I know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do, like, I want to line them up, like the Kimbanda, and get more into, like, the different kinds of Mexican folk magic and all that stuff. Because I know there's a lot, and there's a lot that I definitely don't know about. So.
And I can tell you, like, Eric is really good with brujeria and all that. I do mostly I do a little bit of both, but I mostly know more of, like, the healing aspects of it, like curanderismo. But Eric really knows brujeria. Like, he grew up in that in El Paso. So. Yeah, I keep telling him, like, you gotta do this too,
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate your time. So.
All right, great. Hopefully, let me know if it all, like, records.
All right, I will. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.